Human rights and the Fifth Estate.
Comunidad. Daraja.
Smile.
Harambe. Makar.
Righteousness.
Habla.
Human rights and the Fifth Estate.
I fell in love with Kenny, with the person that he was, how he treated me, how he was with his family, how he catered to me, the way he was with our son. He wasn't afraid to share and show love, and he always brought everybody together. Kenny's family didn't get the information till about 3 o'clock in the morning, but we have found out that his expiration when they declared him to be dead was at 9 p.m. But we didn't receive a phone call right away. Well, Kenny was driving on the Southern State Parkway. He had got pulled over for an apparent traffic violation, going over the speed limit, 8 miles over the speed limit. They said in the depositions, they stated when they ran the license, everything was looking good. They didn't see the other officers come on the scene. And when the other officers came on the scene, they went to Kenny's car and they told him to shut off his engine. And when he went to shut off his engine, he had a push start car. And I guess in 2008, it was like the new thing, and they had never seen that before. So they asked him to demonstrate it again, according to the depositions, and he did so, and they found it weird, and they asked him to get out of the vehicle. They brought him to the back of the car, and from there they said they felt like Kenny was getting antsy and looking around and tried to elbow a cop on the Southern State Parkway and run. From what we know, he was involved in a brutal attack by the police. He was beaten with flashlights while he was handcuffed. He was brought down to the 3rd Precinct in Bayshore, Suffolk County, and he was never given medical attention. When they called the EMS, he was already laid out dead on the floor in his boxers. There was witnesses in the room that heard and saw the cops demonstrating how they beat Kenny. He said that they were demonstrating and joking and laughing how they beat him. And he also stated that he heard one officer say, "Let's drag the dead man's body out of here before he stinks up the place." They had contacted his mother in Florida, and then she contacted us in Long Island. And we all just, from there, I was trying to find out what hospital. The hospital was saying that he wasn't there. I was trying to call the precinct. I was trying to get as much information as I can, but nobody was giving me any information to where he was. I was kind of in disbelief. I didn't believe that it was him. I kind of had to see it for myself. I didn't know what happened, how that could have happened, and you just don't believe it until you actually see it. Yeah. But I automatically broke down and started crying, and I just, went to my son's room and just held him and started crying. And, you just feel a big piece of you just, break. I didn't tell my son right away what happened. I didn't know how to explain to him what happened to his father. But this happened on a Saturday night, and when I went to go take him to school on Monday morning, since it was all over the news, when I walked into the school with him, his teacher happened to be in the hallway, and she came to me and she was like, "I'm so sorry for your loss." And I broke down crying, and then she explained to me that the whole school knew about it, that some of the children in the class knew about it, that they seen his photos on the news, because they showed photos of my son with his father. So at that point, I had to tell him that his father had passed away. He started trying to guess what could have happened, like a car accident or, things like that. And I just told him no. And I said he was involved in a really bad accident. I didn't tell him what kind of accident. And I just told him that the doctors couldn't help him and that now he's in heaven. It was hard. He started crying. Sorry. He started crying, he screamed like, no, not my daddy. But that was the only time that he cried. And I didn't know how he was gonna grow up. I didn't know how it was gonna affect him. So years later, when he was about 8 or 9 years old, he came to me and told me he knew what happened to his father. And when I asked him what happened, he knew the whole story, the whole case, based on everything that we've been doing, the visuals and the marches, the rallies, and all the internet, the news, the media, how much has been exposed. He figured it out, what happened to him. And the only thing that I can tell him was, everybody's human. And there's good people, there's bad people, and, he can't have hate in his heart, And I just told him that not all cops are bad. You sometimes we need them, but you got to be careful because you never know what you're walking into. And I told him that I don't feel like they tried to kill his father, but it happened. And that's why I fight, because it happened. I feel they should pay consequences towards it. And that's why I do what I do. My son's name is Kenny Lazo. There should be no reason why he has to grow up in fear or ashamed of his name because of what happened to his father.
How did he react? How is he reacting now? It's years later, but he started off in a pretty shocked state.
Right. When I first told him, back then when he was 5 years old, he was shocked. And I guess as a child, you don't really know how to handle it. But I always just try to be positive with him and be there. I had stopped working. I started working from home and kind of just devoted my time to being a full-time mother and father. I felt like it was my duty, like I had to do that. As years went on, he excelled in everything. He always said that his father was his angel, he protected him and watched over him. And he excels in school, academics. He's been on honor roll since, he was a child, hundreds, straight A student. And he excels in all sports. He was a star football player, star basketball player, baseball player, track, wins all awards. Inside the band, he's a strong kid, and he really just, he blows my mind, the strength that I see within him and the drive to just be the best that he can in everything. I feel has to be with him doing it for his father. He always said that his father was his angel, he protected him and watched over him. I did not know that the cops and the system, the DA, the precincts, everybody is so corrupt. I didn't know how much corruption went on until this happened to Kenny, because they tried to bash Kenny and make him into this big monster criminal, and he wasn't. And even if he was, he didn't deserve to die the way he did. They didn't have the right to take his life and beat him and deny him of any of his rights or deny him of medical attention, So along the years, I've been learning, and I'm still learning to this day, just how crooked and how corrupt the system is. Even when our case was brought to, the criminal case was brought to trial, they didn't show evidence of him being beat. They didn't show that his death was considered a homicide. We had an independent autopsy done on Kenny because we weren't receiving the results from the coroner's office. We didn't receive the coroner's to about 8 to 9 months later. So when we received ours, which was a couple of weeks after, that's when it was discovered that his death was considered a homicide. But the cops didn't respond to us directly, nor the DA or anybody else that they tried to reach out to. It was just no response. I do know there was 5 officers involved. The one that caused his actual death, I don't know. I really feel it was all of them. They all took part in beating him. They all watched. They all denied him medical attention. So they all at fault. They weren't prosecuted because the criminal case was dismissed. They found no reasonable cause to prosecute or charge any of the officers with anything. We've been trying to keep it alive and raise awareness and trying to get justice. We have the civil case that's still pending that will be going to trial soon within the next couple of months. You know, we started an organization called Justice for Kenny Coalition, where we connect with family members and other victims around New York, Long Island, wherever they're from. And we do a lot of awareness, and we try to give comfort to those who need it and try to guide those who need help, because sometimes you feel like there is nowhere to turn to. On April 12th, we hold a visual/march in memory of Kenny. We hold it at the 3rd Precinct in Bayshore. It's at 12 p.m. and we invite everybody to come out and be a part of it. You know, we chant, we share the story, we raise awareness, we connect with other families. We have crosses with all victims that were killed by Suffolk County with their names listed on it, and we place it in front of the precinct doors to remind them these are how many lives you've taken. I would like to see all the officers charged, indicted for the wrongful actions that they took with Kenny. I would like to see them pay the consequences that they deserve for murdering an innocent man. And I would like to see change within the system. You know, I feel all information should be exposed, and, you know, we should be present when they're showing it to the grand jury, and everything should be there so that it's exposed and there's no sweeping it underneath the carpet, but where we actually can see what's going on every step of the way. I do believe it was swept underneath the carpet by the DA's office because the grand jury was not presented with the proper evidence, so they could not make the right decision. And the only people that could have presented that was the DA when it was brought, you know, to their attention.
Well, I co-founded the Justice for Kenny Coalition. When I first met Jennifer, I was shooting for a community newspaper, and I was shooting her for a front page. After a year, you know, it was like, there was a lot of support in the beginning because people were mourning and they knew Kenny and stuff like that. But after a year, it just kind of died down, and then she felt like, you know, she was like, well, where's the response? You know, where's the community response? We just started talking more, and we decided to create the Justice for Kenny Coalition and utilize people that we knew in the community, like other activists and organizations and artists and hip hop artists. And in the very beginning, there was like there was nothing. It was just, you know, a couple of Newsday articles, you know, very short, like articles, like maybe a few sentences long, all of them having different explanations, but always taking the police's account of what happened, you know. And, you know, it wasn't like, you know, Latino man found dead. It was like drug suspect found dead. You know, it was immediately criminalizing him. And so as we started doing more work around it and doing more events and getting more, like, you know, grassroots media attention, when you do a search for Kenny Lazo now, our stuff kind of dominates everything. And so in a sense, we're seeing how social media, you know, through social media and through the internet, the common person like you or me can influence a case like this. The reason why this is difficult to talk about is because there is no official governing body that collects data on police-related deaths. So, I know of 40, we know of 40, but in reality, it's probably double that. I would not be surprised. A lot of these, there's no follow-up in Long Island, and I think that would be in many pockets of the United States. In Long Island, it's like, it could be anywhere. The cops can pick you up and they can drive anywhere they're doing a crime, they're committing a crime, and it's easier to commit a crime when there's not that many people around to watch, to see what happens. I had a lot of boys in my classes, and a lot of them were emotionally disturbed kids, and they had a lot of issues, and it's like, how do you deal with bad behavior? Well, you have to hold them accountable. It's the same thing with anything else, like with the police. It's like, if you look at the history of accountability, these police get away with murder all the time. If you look at the history of convictions that actually result in prison time, I mean, it's less than 1% easily, And there's no accountability also because there is no governing body that collects this data, right? So you have the media being the default primary source, right? That's kind of like, if the media pays attention to it, and that really changes the ball game too, because then it's also like they're trying to sell the most sensationalistic story, right? Because that's what sells, right? So they're thinking about money. They're not thinking about the community. They're thinking about what's the most ridiculous story that we could put out there that's going to make people buy my paper. These families have gone through incredible trauma, and having been marginalized by everybody, including the news, including the police, including the courts, including their most likely the people that are around them, their neighbors and stuff like that. They've just been really, really marginalized, and they need to have their voices heard, So it's really about coming to them and asking how we can support them. It is absolutely a human rights issue. I mean, the statistic is around 3 people are killed by police nationwide every day. Daily, which is alarming. That's a pretty fast rate. I don't know, what's like, and I'm sure there are some diseases that are faster, but I mean, this is murder we're talking about. This is definitely a human rights issue. Policing means control of movement, right? So it's like, I can go here, but I can't go there, right? Or, I'm not safe, and what that means is my life is not safe. Right, so that's a human rights issue all around.
Jennifer is part of what we would call on a mission. She's engaging in proactive ways to try to heal the community. If you had a young, white, Garden City High School student lying in the street after being shot by the police for 4 hours, the people you would see protesting would not be black and brown. You would see senators and congresspeople and the entire Garden City community, as well as the white community more generally, up in arms. But because we've essentially criminalized black and brown lives, and we've seen through the corporate media how commonplace it is for violence within these communities, perceived or real, I think people have become inured to it. What you can glean from what happened in Kenny's case specifically is that there is a lack of transparency, that the procedures by which police are held accountable for their actions is severely flawed, that the relationship between prosecutors and police is problematic and needs to be addressed, and that it seems as though, and I don't like to speak out of turn, it seems as though extra-legal violence is normative in certain police departments. Beating an unarmed civilian to death, regardless of whether or not he was running from arrest or, as they claim, reaching for their gun, which is kind of a go-to at this juncture. And again, there are no other witnesses. And remember, the claims evolved. We've seen the claims evolve over time, so that's also should raise a red flag. But when you have a gun and baton and pepper spray and there's multiple of you, there should be a way to restrain an individual without resorting to deadly force, without using a chokehold, which is against policy in New York, in the case of Eric Garner, which was used and did directly contribute to his death. But without beating, and certainly without biting, an individual who is unarmed and prone on the ground. The other issue that was raised in his case specifically was that it was clear that his injuries were traumatic enough that someone should have called an ambulance or someone should have called for medical attention immediately. And he was allowed essentially to die on the floor of the jail in that case. And that's also extremely disturbing and disheartening. She was just left to find out, like the rest of us, that a grand jury chose not to indict. And it took her being proactive and seeking out more information and obtaining help through Fred Brewington and through others to basically require that there is some accountability. Like so many other cases in the news of late, the Ferguson case and the Staten Island case, what we find is that there's not a lot of transparency. And so it's difficult to determine whether or not justice was done because we don't know what was presented to the grand jury. In all three circumstances, there was no indictment. But because the grand jury proceedings are sealed, you have no idea what the prosecutor presented to the grand jury, what the deliberations were, what the evidence was. It's particularly vexing when in certain cases, specifically when police officers are being held to account for their actions, there's such a low rate of indictments. Prosecutors cannot do their job without the help of police gathering evidence. And so in the rare circumstances where police officers are the ones who are actually being brought to account for their actions and a grand jury is convened, you have a prosecutor who works with the police and relies on them, now tasked with criticizing and trying to bring charges against them. And so there's an inherent conflict of interest there that results in a much higher rate of non-indictments for police officers as opposed to the 97% of indictments that are assured. One of those recommendations involves independent prosecutors in cases where police are being indicted. There is a movement to actually reconceptualize the role of policing. They do not possess the tools to deal with the social problems that are the true source of crime in society. You know, the tools available to police are fairly blunt. You have monopoly on the use of force, the ability to arrest, the ability to work with prosecutors to prosecute cases. But what we know from the study of crime is that the true sources of crime are inequality, poverty, resource deprivation, opportunity structure, and these are all variables that police really can't do much about. And so there is this notion that perhaps we need to rethink the model and the role of policing in the United States. For example, if you think about what Eric Garner was doing when he entered into the interaction with the police that resulted in his death. He was selling loose cigarettes. Now, technically illegal, but it's a fairly low-level offense for which a person should not end up dead. Similarly, Mike Brown was jaywalking. The police officers I've worked with are not happy with broken windows policing. We're not happy that they were forced, although the hierarchy denies this, to essentially come up with numbers in the stop and frisk program. Police officers understand that broken windows policing, stop and frisk, and all these other more recent policies have in fact made their jobs more difficult. You cannot do policing without the cooperation of the community that you work in. Well, she's doing all the right things now, getting the word out, educating the community about Kenny's case and about the problems and pitfalls with cases of this nature. She's also was very smart in getting the aid of Fred Brewington, who is a famed civil rights attorney. And the criminal case, which is pretty much done since there was no indictment, she's going the civil route. And that is another route victims can take in order to try to get justice, to sue the police department and specifically the officers. And if that doesn't work, then you could go the federal route and try to look at whether or not, and the bar is very high in this, as we just saw in the Ferguson case, but to see whether or not the officers violated Kenny's civil liberties. What we tell our students is the most important thing you can do is to get the word out, write to your congressman or woman, write to your senator, express your horror with the way in which the criminal justice system has been operating in your name. Work toward making change. Enter those fields or careers as a volunteer or as a career where you can actually impact the criminal justice system in a positive way. But the most important thing is awareness. Get the word out.